I've been married to Sarah for 6 years. We met in college, and I always thought we were on the same page. She was fun, ambitious, and incredibly attractive. I was a few years into my career as an IT consultant, and though I wasn't making bank, I was stable. Life seemed perfect until it started to unravel in ways I never expected. Lately, Sarah had been acting differently. She was often glued to her phone, smiling at texts I couldn't see. She started dressing up more frequently for work, even on days when she had no meetings. At first, I brushed it off as her becoming more career-focused, which I supported. But doubt crept in like an uninvited guest. I caught her lying about simple things: where she was, who she was with. It was subtle but persistent. I'd come home early some days and notice her car wasn't in the driveway, only for her to return smelling like a mix of cheap perfume and something I couldn't identify. One night I had a gut feeling that something was off. I decided to check her emails. I know, invasion of privacy, but my instincts were screaming at me, and I wanted some clarity. I found an email from her personal assistant, Jake. They were talking about a business trip that I had never heard of. The trip was scheduled for the same weekend I had planned a getaway for us. My heart raced. I spent hours analyzing every line, every word. It felt like I was finding pieces of a puzzle that I wasn't sure I wanted to complete. The next day, I confronted her. It was a Saturday, sunny outside, but everything felt dark inside. I had planned a nice breakfast, but my mind was clouded with uncertainty. "Sarah, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. When I dropped the bomb about the email, her face went pale, and for a moment I saw panic in her eyes. "Jake, what are you talking about? He's just a friend," she stammered, and I couldn't believe the audacity of her lie. A friend. The email was laced with flirtation and inside jokes that had nothing to do with work. I pressed on, demanding to know the truth. She backpedaled, claiming it was all innocent. "He just helps me with work," she said, but I could see the cracks beneath her facade. The confrontation escalated. I felt anger boiling inside me, and I couldn't hold back. "You think I'm stupid? I can read between the lines. This isn't just about sharing office duties." Her excuses were pitiful, and the more she talked, the more I realized how deep her betrayal cut. She was lying to my face, and it fueled a rage I didn't know I had. I wanted to scream, but instead I walked away, needing to process the chaos swirling in my mind. That was the moment my world shifted. I felt a mix of disbelief and heartbreak, but mostly an undeniable urge to regain control over my life. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, going through old photos of us and remembering happier times. I felt crushed, but also a flicker of resolve beginning to ignite within me. The emotional impact was overwhelming. I was angry, yes, but more than that, I felt humiliated. I had trusted her completely, and she had thrown that trust away for what? A thrill, a brief escape. The sadness was almost suffocating, but I knew I had to make a decision about the future. I couldn't let myself spiral into despair. This was the beginning of my journey toward reclaiming my life. I realized there was more at stake than just our marriage. I had to consider my own happiness. And with that, I started to plot my course. If I had learned anything in those early hours of shock, it was this: I was done being the passive partner in my own life. I needed to take charge. The initial pain of betrayal would soon fuel a fire in me that would change everything. After the confrontation, my emotions were a whirlwind. I felt like I was caught in a storm, confused, angry, and lost. The next few days were a blur. I went to work, put on a brave face, and pretended everything was fine, but inside I was crumbling. I could barely concentrate on my projects, and all I could think about was Sarah and Jake. I knew I had to dig deeper, and the idea of confronting the reality of my situation haunted me. One evening, after another day of pretending, I decided to follow her. I had to see for myself if she was truly involved with Jake. I parked down the street from her office, heart racing as I watched people come and go. The sun began to set, casting long shadows on the pavement, and my stomach churned with anxiety. I needed to know if I was right or if I was just imagining things. As the office emptied, my heart sank when I saw Sarah walk out with Jake. They were laughing, leaning in close to one another, and for a moment I felt paralyzed. I couldn't believe my eyes. My heart raced as they climbed into his car, and I followed at a distance, trying to control my breathing. They drove to a restaurant several blocks away, and my worst fears were confirmed when they got out, still engaged in conversation laced with easy smiles and familiar body language. I watched as they entered the restaurant, my mind racing with thoughts of betrayal. This wasn't some innocent lunch meeting. They were clearly comfortable with each other in a way that felt intimate. I felt the anger rising again, but the sadness was even more profound. It was unbearable to see the woman I loved so casually enjoy the company of another man. My world felt like it was collapsing around me. I drove back home, feeling like I was in a daze. The anger bubbled under the surface, but it was mixed with an overwhelming sense of loss. I wanted to scream, to cry, to lash out, but I couldn't let her see me like that. I had to think clearly. I needed a plan. That night I didn't sleep. I scrolled through my phone, looking for advice online, trying to make sense of the situation. I stumbled upon stories of people who had faced similar betrayals but had turned their pain into something powerful. Some had started businesses, others had traveled the world. I realized I could do the same. I didn't want to wallow in misery. I wanted to turn my life around, and that included not relying on Sarah for my happiness. The next day, I decided to take control. I met a few friends for drinks after work to distract myself. During that time, I shared my troubles with them, and their support was invaluable. They rallied around me, encouraging me to focus on my career and dreams. I had always wanted to start my own IT consultancy firm, but I'd never found the courage or motivation. But now I had a fire lit under me. I was going to be my own boss, and I wasn't going to let Sarah and Jake ruin my future. With each passing day, I felt the resolve deepening. I started working on a business plan in my spare time. I spent hours researching, networking, and planning. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to put in the work. I couldn't change the past, but I could build a future that was mine alone. As I dove into work and planning, I also carefully considered how I would handle Sarah when the time came to confront her again. I could feel my emotions shifting from pain toward empowerment. I was no longer a victim in this situation. I was going to take charge of my life, no matter what it took. I started to cut back on the things that tied me to Sarah. I didn't want to be reminded of our life together, and I found new hobbies and interests that filled my time. I began to reconnect with old friends and even made new ones who shared my interests in business. The more I distanced myself from her, the more clarity I gained. I realized I was capable of so much more than I had given myself credit for, and I was ready to prove it to myself. With this newfound motivation, I set a timeline for launching my business. I was determined to make it happen within 6 months. I started saving money, cutting back on expenses, and putting every ounce of energy into my plans. I was excited about my future for the first time in a long while. I could feel the tides turning, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next. This journey was about more than revenge. It was about reclaiming my autonomy and proving to myself that I could rise above the heartache. I was ready to show Sarah just how powerful I could be when I put my mind to it. It was time to take back the life that was slipping through my fingers and build something incredible. I knew she would soon realize just how wrong she was to think she could have it all, leaving me in dust. With the determination to build my own path, I dove headfirst into my plans for the business. I spent every spare moment researching the latest trends in the IT industry, networking with potential clients, and developing my brand. My days were filled with meetings, late nights of brainstorming, and the electrifying feeling of purpose. The more I immersed myself in my work, the less I thought about Sarah and her betrayal. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing a brighter future ahead. However, life had its way of throwing curveballs. One evening, after a long day of meetings, I returned home to find Sarah sitting on the couch, waiting for me. She had that familiar guilty look on her face, one that immediately set my nerves on edge. I had been preparing myself for this moment, knowing it was inevitable, but seeing her there made my heart race in a different way. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice surprisingly soft. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "I know things have been tense between us," she began, And I want to explain what's been going on. You deserve that. I braced myself for the inevitable excuses. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just feeling so much pressure at work and Jake was there for me. You know how demanding my job has been lately. It was just a moment of weakness and I wish I could take it back, she said, her eyes searching mine for understanding. Her words struck me like a slap. A moment of weakness. I couldn't believe the audacity of it. I felt anger surge through me again, but I forced myself to remain calm. A moment of weakness. Is that what you call it? You had an affair. It wasn't just some innocent conversation. You were with him, Sarah. You chose to be with him. She tried to defend herself, claiming it wasn't serious, that it was just physical, but I wasn't buying it. How can you say that? The way you two were together, it looked intimate. You were laughing, sharing your secrets. That's more than just sex, and you know it. My voice was rising, and I could feel the frustration boiling over. I made a mistake, she said, tears welling in her eyes. But I love you. I want to work through this. Part of me wanted to believe her, to give her another chance, but the other part was screaming at me to walk away. I had already started moving on, finding my footing in a new life, and I wasn't ready to fall back into the trap of her deceit. I can't keep doing this, Sarah. You broke my trust, and I don't know if I can ever get it back. I need space. I replied, my voice steady but filled with pain. I turned to walk away, and I could hear her sobbing behind me. It was heartbreaking, but I had to stay strong. I was no longer the man who would accept half-hearted apologies. In the following weeks, we coexisted under the same roof but remained emotionally worlds apart. I focused on my business and built a support network outside of our marriage. I shared my plans with friends, gathered advice, and even found a mentor who had successfully launched his own firm. The excitement of my venture consumed me, and I felt invigorated by the possibilities. But the emotional strain of living with Sarah was exhausting. She would often try to engage me in conversation, but I found myself growing more distant. I didn't want to discuss our problems or revisit the hurt. Instead, I channeled my energy into my work. As I poured my heart into my business, I began to see tangible results. I secured my first client, a small startup that needed IT support, and the thrill of having my first contract made everything feel worthwhile. I dedicated myself to delivering exceptional service, going above and beyond to ensure their satisfaction. Each little victory felt like a step away from Sarah and her betrayal, a confirmation that I was capable of creating something meaningful on my own. Meanwhile, Sarah seemed to be struggling with the consequences of her actions. I noticed her becoming more withdrawn, and it was heartbreaking to see her in pain. But in a way, it fueled my resolve. She had chosen to step outside our marriage, and I was determined to take my life back. One night, as I was working late, I overheard her on the phone with Jake. I couldn't help but listen in, curiosity getting the better of me. She was whispering, but I could hear snippets of their conversation. I do know what to do. I messed up. I don't want to lose him. My heart sank, but it also ignited a fire within me. She was caught in her own trap, and it became clear to me that I was no longer the one in a vulnerable position. I had risen from the ashes of this betrayal, and I was ready to take the next step. The next day, I sat down and laid out my plans. I made the decision to start preparing for a formal separation. I wanted to be clear-headed and organized when the time came to discuss our future. I could feel the weight of the world beginning to lift from my shoulders as I realized that I had everything under control. I wouldn't be the victim anymore. I was ready to walk away from the hurt. I found myself more empowered than ever, ready to face whatever would come next. My heart was still healing, but it was also stronger, and I was determined to use this experience to fuel my future. I knew I was on the verge of something significant, both in my business and in my personal life. I was ready to reclaim my power, and nothing, not even Sarah's tears, could deter me from that path. This journey was no longer just about revenge. It was about becoming who I was meant to be. I had learned that I didn't need anyone else to validate my worth, and I was finally ready to embrace my own strength. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself fully immersed in my new life. My IT consultancy was slowly gaining traction, and my professional network was expanding. With every new contract I secured, the thrill of my independence grew stronger. I was building something that was entirely mine, and it felt incredible. There was a sense of freedom that came from pursuing my dreams on my own terms, free from the weight of Sarah's betrayal. But life with Sarah continued to be an emotional roller coaster. She would often try to engage me, asking about my day, expressing regret, and seeking forgiveness. I had become adept at deflecting her conversations, keeping my responses short and noncommittal. I didn't want to reopen wounds that were slowly healing. One evening, after a particularly successful week where I had landed a significant client, I decided to celebrate by treating myself to a nice dinner at home. As I prepared the meal, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to make a definitive decision about my future with Sarah. The separation I was planning was looming in my mind like a shadow, and I knew I had to address it head-on. When Sarah walked through the door that evening, I could sense something was different. She looked more put together than usual, dressed in a stylish outfit that I hadn't seen before. I felt a strange mix of emotions, anxiety, anger, and even a twinge of nostalgia for the woman I had once loved. But this wasn't the time for sentimentality. "Hey, I made dinner and I thought we could talk," I began, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Sure," she replied, her voice light but her eyes betraying a hint of apprehension. As we sat down to eat, the atmosphere was tense. The food was delicious, but I could hardly enjoy it. I took a deep breath and decided it was time to lay my cards on the table. "Sarah, I think we need to talk about where we are headed." Her eyes widened and I saw a flicker of fear pass across her face. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've been doing a lot of thinking. The truth is, we can't just pretend everything is fine. Your affair with Jake changed everything between us, and I can't move past it. I think it's best if we separate." The silence stretched between us, heavy and thick. I could see the tears starting to form in her eyes, but I steeled myself against the wave of pity that surged within me. "Please don't say that," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "I know I messed up, but I love you. I've been trying to make things right. I don't want to lose you." Her words cut deep, but I had to remind myself of the reasons I was making this decision. "Love isn't just words, Sarah. It's actions, too. You've shown me that you can't be trusted, and I can't live like this anymore." She leaned forward, desperation in her eyes. "I'll do better, I swear. Just give me another chance. We can go to counseling. We can figure this out together." I shook my head, trying to remain firm. "I appreciate that you want to work on things, but I can't keep putting myself through this pain. It's not fair to either of us. I need to take care of myself now." There was a moment of silence where we both locked eyes, and I could see the realization wash over her. The denial slipped away, replaced by a stark understanding of our reality. She knew I was serious. "I can't believe this is happening," she said softly, her voice breaking. "I never wanted it to end like this." "Neither did I replied, my heart heavy. "But I need to move forward. I'm starting to build a life for myself, and it doesn't include deceit. I hope you can understand that." The conversation continued, each word laced with pain and regret. Sarah tried to argue, to negotiate, but I held my ground. I had come too far to allow myself to be swayed by her emotional pleas. It was difficult to see her cry, but I knew it was part of the process of moving on. Eventually, she fell silent, and I could see the fight leave her. I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. This was the closure I needed. We decided to take a few weeks to sort out the logistics of the separation, finances, housing, and other practical matters. In the days that followed, I moved forward with a sense of clarity. I focused on my business, ensuring that I was laying a solid foundation for the future. My client list grew, and I found myself enjoying the freedom of being my own boss more than I had ever imagined. The pride I felt in my accomplishments fueled me further. One evening, while reviewing contracts at my home office, I received a text from Sarah. It was a simple message asking how I was doing. I hesitated before responding, but I knew I had to be honest. I told her that things were moving along, that I was focusing on my business, and that I was okay. To my surprise, she responded with genuine support. "I'm glad to hear you're doing well. I hope you know I truly regret everything, and I wish you nothing but the best." For a moment, I felt a flicker of nostalgia, but then I quickly reminded myself of the importance of moving on. I was determined to keep my distance emotionally. As I settled into this new phase of my life, I realized that this journey was not just about revenge or recovering from betrayal. It was also about self-discovery. I was learning more about myself than I ever had while I was in the marriage. I was becoming stronger, more independent, and more aware of my worth. I had reclaimed my life, but I knew that the final steps of this journey would involve embracing my new normal and letting go of the past. There was still work to be done, and I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. I had come too far to turn back now. As the separation progressed, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. The initial shock had worn off, and I was starting to find my footing in this new chapter of my life. My business was thriving, and my confidence was building. I realized that I was capable of so much more than I had ever given myself credit for. I started to embrace my independence in ways that surprised me. I began to travel for work, attending conferences and networking events where I was able to meet other entrepreneurs and learn from their experiences. Each new connection I made reinforced the idea that I was on the right path, and it felt exhilarating to be part of a community that understood my journey. But the emotional aftermath of my relationship with Sarah still lingered. Occasionally, I would find myself reminiscing about the past and the dreams we had shared. I thought about the life we had built together and how quickly it had shattered. However, those moments of nostalgia were fleeting. I quickly reminded myself of the reasons I had chosen to separate. The betrayal was a wound that I still had to heal from, and I knew it was better to move forward than to dwell on what could have been. One weekend, I decided to take a short trip to a nearby city for a business convention. It was an opportunity to showcase my consultancy and connect with potential clients. I packed my bags with excitement, eager to immerse myself in the world of entrepreneurship and innovation. At the convention, I felt invigorated by the energy of like-minded professionals. I attended workshops, participated in discussions, and networked with individuals who shared my passion for technology. I couldn't help but feel a sense of belonging that I had been missing for so long. That evening, while attending a networking dinner, I struck up a conversation with a fellow entrepreneur named Lindsay. She was charismatic, driven, and shared many of my interests. We talked for hours, exchanging ideas and experiences. I felt a spark that I hadn't felt since before my marriage. It was refreshing to connect with someone who wasn't tainted by my past. As we continued to converse, I found myself opening up about my journey, a little about the struggles I faced in my marriage, but mostly about my aspirations and the excitement I felt about my business. Lindsay listened intently, and I could see her genuine interest in what I had to say. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and by the end of the night, we exchanged contact information, both eager to keep in touch. Returning home from the convention, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. My business was growing, and I had made a connection that could potentially lead to something more. I found myself daydreaming about the possibilities, a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to experience in a long time. But with excitement came apprehension. I still needed to process the emotional turmoil from my past. I began to realize that if I wanted to move forward with someone new, I had to fully let go of the baggage that came with my relationship with Sarah. I didn't want to risk dragging old wounds into a new relationship, and that meant confronting my feelings head-on. In the days that followed, I committed to a personal journey of healing. I started journaling my thoughts, exploring my emotions, and reflecting on everything I had experienced. I spoke with friends who encouraged me to express my feelings rather than suppress them. I even sought the guidance of a therapist who helped me navigate the complex emotions surrounding my separation. As I delved deeper into my feelings, I began to understand that my worth wasn't defined by my past. I had the power to shape my future, free from the shadows of betrayal. I learned to forgive myself for the time I had spent in a toxic relationship, recognizing that the choices I had made were not a reflection of my value, but rather a part of my growth. After several weeks of self-reflection, I felt ready to embrace the idea of dating again. I reached out to Lindsay, and we began to communicate regularly, sharing ideas and discussing our businesses. The more we talked, the more I felt drawn to her. There was a shared understanding and mutual respect that made me excited about the possibility of something new. Eventually, we decided to meet for coffee, and the chemistry we had established over the phone translated seamlessly into real life. We spent hours talking, laughing, and discovering common interests. I felt lighter in her presence, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. With each passing moment, I realized just how far I had come. Meanwhile, Sarah continued to reach out. She would send texts every so often, checking in to see how I was doing. I responded politely but kept the conversations brief. I knew she was trying to reopen the lines of communication, but I didn't want to get caught up in the emotional turmoil again. I had found my footing and was no longer willing to jeopardize my progress. One evening, Sarah called, and I could hear the tremor in her voice. "Can we talk? I really want to see you and explain myself better," she said. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to hear her out to understand her perspective, but another part of me knew that dragging this out would only complicate things. "Sarah, I think it's best if we don't meet. I'm moving forward with my life and I need to focus on that." There was a pause on the other end and I could sense her disappointment. "I understand," she finally replied. "I just want you to know that I regret everything. I wish things could be different." I took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of sorrow and resolve. "I appreciate you saying that, but we can't go back to what we had. I need to look ahead now." That conversation felt like a pivotal moment for me. I realized that I was finally ready to let go of the past without looking back. It was time to embrace the future I had been working so hard to create. As I continued to build my business and connect with Lindsay, I felt a renewed sense of hope. I was ready to step into a new chapter of my life, one that was filled with possibilities and promise. I had learned valuable lessons through my experience, lessons that would shape my approach to relationships and my career moving forward. This journey had not just been about revenge or healing, it had been about reclaiming my life and finding my identity again. I was no longer defined by my past or by someone else's choices. I was ready to embrace the adventure that lay ahead, and for the first time in a long time, I was excited about what the future held. As the months passed, my life began to settle into a rhythm that felt both new and exhilarating. My consultancy was thriving, I was gaining recognition in my field, and my client base was steadily growing. The sense of accomplishment and independence I felt was intoxicating. I was finally living life on my own terms, free to pursue my passions without the weight of a complicated marriage dragging me down. Lindsay and I continued to see each other, and our connection deepened in ways I hadn't expected. She was intelligent, driven, and supportive, qualities I had longed for but hadn't realized I missed until I experienced them again. With her, I felt a sense of authenticity that had been absent in my previous relationship. We shared laughter, dreams, and a mutual respect that was refreshing. It was like stepping into a world where I could finally be myself without pretense. One evening, while we were enjoying a quiet dinner together, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. I looked across the table at her and realized how far I had come. "You know," I said, "I've been through a lot in the past year, but I'm finally starting to feel like myself again. Thank you for being such an amazing part of this journey." Her smile made my heart soar. "I'm just glad I could be here for you. You've shown so much strength and it's inspiring to see you grow," she replied, her eyes shining with sincerity. As we finished our meal, I felt a sense of peace and happiness that I had almost forgotten was possible. I had moved past the hurt and betrayal, learning to trust myself and my instincts. It was liberating to know that I could create a life filled with joy and fulfillment, one step at a time. However, part of me still felt a lingering cloud from my past. I knew that healing was an ongoing process, and while I had made significant strides, I also realized that I needed to confront my feelings about Sarah one last time. I had buried the pain deep, and it was time to acknowledge it fully. I decided to reach out to Sarah. It felt like an unlikely decision, but I wanted to close this chapter with clarity. I texted her, asking if we could meet one last time to talk. To my surprise, she agreed. The meeting was set for a weekend afternoon at a cafe that had been our favorite spot during happier times. When I arrived, my heart raced with anticipation and anxiety. Seeing her seated at a table felt surreal. She looked different, perhaps older, more worn. As I approached, I couldn't help but notice the flicker of hope in her eyes, but I also sensed the uncertainty. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, her voice soft. I nodded, taking a seat across from her. I wanted to talk and find some closure for both of us. Her expression shifted slightly, revealing a mixture of longing and regret. "I've thought a lot about our time together and the mistakes I made. I never meant to hurt you. I'm truly sorry for the pain I caused." "I appreciate that," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "But we both know that what happened can't be undone. I've had to learn how to live with that, and it's taken time." She looked down, sadness etched across her face. "I know. I've had to face the consequences of my actions as well. I lost you, and I see the impact of that now." There was a moment of silence, and I took the opportunity to express my feelings. "I think it's important for both of us to acknowledge what happened and how it shaped us. I've moved on, and I'm building a life that I'm proud of, but I want you to understand that it's okay for us to let go of the past." She nodded slowly, absorbing my words. "I want you to be happy. I really do. I've been trying to rebuild my life too, but I know it will take time." We talked for a while longer, sharing memories and regrets, but also hopes for the future. I felt lighter after our conversation, as if a weight had been lifted. It was a necessary step to fully let go of the past and embrace what lay ahead. As we parted ways, I realized that I had finally found closure. There was no longer any lingering resentment or bitterness. It had all been transformed into lessons learned and growth achieved. I walked away from that cafe feeling empowered, ready to embrace my new life without the shadows of yesterday holding me back. In the months that followed, my relationship with Lindsay blossomed. We traveled together, explored new restaurants, and shared our aspirations. With her, I found the companionship and support I had longed for. I knew that I was finally in a healthy relationship, one built on trust and mutual respect. By the time the anniversary of my separation rolled around, I felt a sense of celebration rather than sorrow. I had come so far from the man I once was, a man caught in the throes of betrayal and heartache. Now, I stood firm in my identity, proud of my accomplishments and ready to embrace whatever the future held. Looking back, I recognized that the journey had been difficult, but it had shaped me into a stronger person. I had learned that life's challenges could either break you or build you up, and I chose the latter. I was grateful for the lessons learned, the relationships forged, and the resilience I had discovered within myself. As I moved forward, I knew one thing for certain. I was excited about my future, and I was ready to embrace it fully. I was no longer a victim of someone else's choices. I was the architect of my own destiny, and I was determined to make it extraordinary.